Something just happened that could change everything for gun owners across this country. The Department of Justice has just filed major lawsuits against multiple states, and if you own a firearm, this directly affects you. Most people have no idea how serious this situation has become, and by the time most people understand what is happening, it may already be too late to do anything about it. In May 2026, the DOJ launched an aggressive legal offensive against state gun bans. They sued the state of Colorado over its ban on standard capacity magazines, and they also sued the city of Denver over its assault weapons ban. These are not small symbolic lawsuits. The Justice Department is arguing that these state laws violate the Second Amendment and that law-abiding citizens have a constitutional right to own the firearms and magazines that these states have banned. This is a dramatic shift from the previous administration, and it represents something that gun rights advocates have been waiting years to see. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, who leads the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, has been clear about what they are trying to accomplish. Her office has hired a team of Second Amendment specialists and is actively targeting states with unconstitutional gun laws. The goal is not just to win these individual cases. The goal is to create legal precedent that will protect gun owners everywhere and force states to comply with Supreme Court rulings that have been on the books for years, but that many states have simply ignored. The legal foundation for these lawsuits comes from landmark Supreme Court decisions. In 2008, the court ruled in District of Columbia v. Heller that the Second Amendment protects the right of law-abiding citizens to possess weapons that are in common use for lawful purposes. In 2022, the court reinforced this protection in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin by establishing that government cannot simply balance away constitutional rights by claiming public safety concerns. These decisions should have invalidated many state gun bans, but lower courts have been slow to apply them, and some states have continued to enforce laws that clearly contradict what the Supreme Court has ruled. This is where it gets serious. States like Colorado have been operating under the assumption that their gun restrictions would stand regardless of what the Supreme Court said. Colorado enacted a ban on large-capacity magazines in 2013, and Denver has had an assault weapons ban since 1989. These laws have been enforced against ordinary citizens, some of whom have faced criminal charges simply for possessing standard magazines or commonly owned firearms. The DOJ is now saying that these laws are unconstitutional, and they are putting the full weight of the federal government behind that argument. If you are a gun owner living in a state with strict gun laws, you need to understand what this means for you. The lawsuits against Colorado and Denver are just the beginning. The DOJ is also actively litigating cases in the Virgin Islands, where residents have been waiting years for concealed carry permits due to excessive delays and discriminatory requirements. They are suing the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for creating a 3-year wait time for gun permits. They have sued Massachusetts for requiring gun manufacturers to go through a separate approval process for each firearm model. They are fighting Hawaii's law that effectively prevents people from carrying firearms on private property open to the public. And they are challenging Washington, D.C.'s categorical ban on assault rifles like the AR-15. The pattern here is unmistakable. The DOJ is sending a message to every state that has been ignoring the Second Amendment. They are saying that if you pass laws that violate the constitutional rights of gun owners, we will see you in court. And unlike the previous administration, they are not just filing briefs and making arguments. They are dedicating resources, hiring specialists, and following through with actual litigation. If you have been watching these developments from the sidelines, now is the time to pay attention. What happens in these cases will determine whether states can continue to impose restrictions that the Supreme Court has already said are unconstitutional. The outcome will affect gun owners in every state, not just the ones being sued right now. There is something else you need to understand about how we got here. For years, lower federal courts treated the Second Amendment as a second-class right. They would allow states to ban commonly owned firearms and magazines by simply conducting an interest-balancing test, weighing public safety concerns against the right to keep and bear arms. This approach allowed courts to uphold virtually any gun restriction, as long as they could articulate some public safety rationale. The Bruin decision in 2022 was supposed to end this practice by making clear that courts cannot use interest balancing to justify infringements on constitutional rights. But many lower courts have been slow to adapt, and some have continued to apply the old framework in slightly modified forms. The DOJ lawsuits are designed to push back against this resistance. When a state like Colorado continues to enforce a magazine ban that contradicts Supreme Court precedent, the federal government is now stepping in to force compliance. This creates a direct conflict that will eventually have to be resolved by higher courts, and the hope is that those courts will reaffirm what the Supreme Court has already said about the Second Amendment. Here is what most people miss about this situation. These lawsuits are not just about the specific laws being challenged. They are about establishing a principle that will apply nationwide. When the DOJ wins a case against Colorado's magazine ban, that precedent will be used to challenge similar bans in New Jersey, New York, California, and every other state that has been telling gun owners that their rights do not matter. The legal strategy is to create a chain of victories that will eventually make it impossible for states to maintain bans on commonly owned firearms and magazines. The people behind this effort understand what is at stake. Assistant Attorney General Dillon has said that her goal is to have all state regulations that are inconsistent with pro-Second Amendment cases struck down, settled, or withdrawn before she leaves her post. That is an ambitious timeline, but it reflects the seriousness with which this administration views the issue. They are not treating the Second Amendment as a political talking point. They are treating it as a fundamental constitutional right that must be defended. This is also where the fight gets personal for millions of gun owners. Imagine living in a state where you cannot legally possess the same magazines that come standard with the most popular rifles in America. Imagine being told that you cannot own an AR-15, which is owned by tens of millions of lawful citizens across the country, simply because you happen to live in a particular state. Imagine facing criminal charges not because you did anything dangerous or harmful, but simply because you exercised a right that the Constitution guarantees. This is the reality that many people have been living under, and the DOJ lawsuits represent the first serious effort to change that reality. The dangerous part is that many gun owners have become resigned to these restrictions. They have accepted the narrative that some states simply will not allow certain firearms or magazines, and they have adjusted their lives accordingly. Some have moved to other states. Some have surrendered property they legally owned before a ban took effect. Some have simply stopped buying certain firearms because they assume they cannot have them. But the DOJ is now saying that this resignation may have been premature. If these lawsuits succeed, the restrictions that millions of people have accepted as permanent may suddenly disappear. If you want to understand how important this moment is, consider what has happened with the Supreme Court. The court has issued rulings that clearly protect the right to own commonly used firearms and magazines. But the court has also been selective about which cases it chooses to hear. It recently denied certiorari in dozens of cases raising Second Amendment challenges, which means those cases will be decided by lower courts whose track record on gun rights has not always been favorable. The DOJ lawsuits provide a way to build favorable precedent even without Supreme Court involvement. When the federal government argues that a state law is unconstitutional, courts are more likely to give those arguments serious consideration than they might give to arguments from private litigants. What happens next will depend on how the courts respond to these lawsuits. Colorado and Denver are expected to vigorously defend their laws, and the cases will likely take months or years to fully resolve. But the legal momentum is clearly on the side of gun rights now. The DOJ has made clear that it will not allow states to pocket veto constitutional rights by simply refusing to comply with Supreme Court precedent. And the team of Second Amendment specialists being assembled at the DOJ is focused specifically on challenging these restrictions in court. The implications extend far beyond the states that are currently being sued. Virginia is considering sweeping new gun control legislation that would impose significant restrictions on lawful gun ownership. New Jersey and New York continue to maintain some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country. Illinois has been enforcing an assault weapons ban that the Seventh Circuit is currently reviewing. The DOJ has said it is monitoring all of these situations, and it has made clear that states should expect legal challenges if they enact laws that contradict established constitutional protections. If you are a gun owner, you have a stake in what happens here. Every lawsuit that succeeds creates precedent that protects your rights. Every state that is forced to abandon an unconstitutional restriction removes a threat that could have affected you or your family. And every victory strengthens the legal foundation that future challenges will be built upon. By the time people understand how significant these developments are, it is often too late to get involved in shaping the outcome. But right now, while these cases are still being litigated, there is an opportunity to follow what is happening and to be prepared for the results. The DOJ lawsuits represent a turning point in how the federal government approaches state gun laws. For the first time in years, there is a coordinated, well-resourced effort to force states to comply with the Second Amendment as the Supreme Court has interpreted it. The question for gun owners is what to do with this information. You can follow these cases closely and stay informed about how they develop. You can support organizations that are working on similar challenges at the state and local level. You can make sure that you understand your own rights and the legal landscape in your state. And you can share this information with other gun owners who may not realize what is happening. If you have found this video helpful, I want to ask you something directly. If you believe that gun owners deserve to know when their constitutional rights are being defended in court, then please subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button if you think this information matters. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The more people who understand what is happening, the better positioned we all are to protect our rights. The legal battles ahead will not be easy. States like Colorado and Massachusetts have shown that they are willing to fight to maintain their restrictions, and the courts have not always been sympathetic to Second Amendment claims. But the DOJ's involvement changes the calculus in a fundamental way. When the federal government makes constitutional arguments on behalf of gun owners, courts are forced to take those arguments seriously in a way that sometimes does not happen when the arguments come from private litigants alone. The stakes could not be higher. If these lawsuits succeed, they will establish that states cannot ban commonly owned firearms and magazines simply by declaring them dangerous or unnecessary. If they fail, the status quo will be maintained, and states will continue to operate under the assumption that their gun restrictions will stand regardless of what the Supreme Court has ruled. The outcome will affect every gun owner in the country, not just those living in the states being sued. Here is what nobody tells you about this situation. The media coverage of these lawsuits has been relatively limited, which means many gun owners have no idea that anything is changing. They go about their daily lives assuming that the legal landscape is the same as it was 5 years ago, not realizing that significant developments are unfolding in courts across the country. This lack of awareness could prove costly for people who fail to stay informed about cases that could directly affect their rights. The DOJ has also made clear that it expects other states to take notice. The lawsuits against Colorado and Denver are designed in part to send a message to legislators in other states who are considering passing similar restrictions. If you enact a law that violates the Second Amendment, you can expect to be sued by the federal government. This deterrent effect could be one of the most significant outcomes of the entire effort because it might prevent states from passing new restrictions in the first place. The people leading this effort are not just lawyers filing paperwork. They are constitutional advocates who understand the stakes and who are committed to seeing this fight through to the end. The team being assembled at the DOJ includes specialists who have spent their careers working on Second Amendment issues, and they have the resources and authority to take on states that have previously felt immune from legal consequences. What happens in the next few months will set the trajectory for years to come. Courts will issue rulings that either reinforce or undermine the legal foundation that the DOJ is trying to build. States will either comply with constitutional requirements or continue to resist. And gun owners across the country will either see their rights protected or continue to live under restrictions that should never have been imposed in the first place. If you have made it this far in this video, you are now more informed than most gun owners in this country. You understand what the DOJ is doing, why it matters, and what is at stake. The question is what you will do with this information. Will you share it with others? Will you follow these cases as they develop? Will you support the organizations and advocates who are fighting for your rights? The choices you make in the coming weeks and months could have a lasting impact on the legal landscape for gun owners in America. The situation is moving fast, and the developments we are seeing now are only the beginning. The DOJ has made clear that this is a priority, and they have committed significant resources to the effort. States that have been ignoring constitutional requirements are now facing real consequences for the first time. And the legal foundation being established through these lawsuits could reshape the entire landscape of gun rights in this country. If you care about protecting your Second Amendment rights, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ready for what is coming next. The stakes are too high to sit on the sidelines, and the opportunity to make a difference is here right now. Make sure you are part of the solution by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it with everyone who needs to understand what is happening. The fight for our rights is far from over, but we are finally seeing the kind of support that gun owners have been waiting for. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember that your rights are worth fighting for.